Good afternoon. I'm Shelley Jones, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at Missouri State University. The Alumni Association is the organization through which Missouri State students continue their connection with MSU when they leave the university. The Alumni Association is a non-dues paying organization, and all of our alums are considered members. If you are new to our series, BearTalks webinars are monthly professional development sessions now available in a virtual format. So how today's webinar will work. We can't see or hear you. You'll have the Q&A function. If you can please use that for asking questions throughout the presentation. And we will share our panelists' contact information to follow-up communications. So if your question doesn't get answered or you think of others, feel free to reach out to them after the webinar. Unfortunately, due to time limitations, most likely we will not get to every question. So this month's topic is business and dining etiquette. In today's competitive job market, business etiquette, including table manners, are important. Missteps can be embarrassing and can potentially send a message about your professionalism or lack thereof. This webinar is designed to give you a competitive edge, but most importantly, we just want to help you improve your confidence when it comes to business and dining etiquette. With me today are three panelists, and in order of their presentation, we have Brett Gaines, Margie Stewart, and Brad Bodenhausen. So Brett works as a diversity and inclusion practitioner in talent and acquisition at Cerner in Kansas City, Missouri. He has served several years in the recruitment field in both higher education as well as in the corporate setting. He is passionate about helping others succeed in their career search and shine as they go through the interview process, and he looks forward to sharing some of his insider tips and tricks today. So welcome, Brett. Joining us again this month, we have Margie Stewart. Margie is a frequent guest on our BearTalks series. She has worked at the Missouri State Career Center for 18 years and has served in a variety of roles, from college liaison with the College of Business as well as the College of Education. She helps students with job searches and career exploration, and she has been the primary liaison with employers who are recruiting MSU students. So welcome, Margie. Then finally, we have Brad Bodenhausen. Brad is the Associate Vice President of International Education and Training at Missouri State. He is responsible for all aspects of the university's international operations. And prior to working at MSU, he served as an Executive Vice President at the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce. And then early in his career, he was the Deputy News Secretary and District Director for the Office of U.S. Senator John C. Danforth. So through his international and community experiences, he is a frequent guest or host of business dinners in which intercultural skills and etiquette are a necessity. So first off, we would like to go ahead and do a poll so we can get a better feel of who we have with us today in the audience. So if we could go ahead and launch that. Okay, so it looks like we're kind of a mix, a lot of alums here. Good. 48%, 10% students, 22 faculty, staff, and 20% friends and others. Well, thank you all for participating in that. All right, so I think I closed that. There we go. All right, so before we start in with our PowerPoint presentation, we'd like to ask each of our panelists just to share some initial perspectives on the importance of business and dining etiquette in their particular professions. So let's go ahead and start with Brett.
Well, thanks, Shelley. So as Shelley mentioned, my name is Brett Gaines, and I have been within the recruitment space here for the last 6 years of my career. And so really from dining etiquette, from the interview process all the way through that workplace etiquette, I think you find a lot of things that are changing, but the basics are still there. Etiquette really kind of revolves around those social norms and expectations that we need to have, and understanding your audience and the culture that you're integrating into, and being respectful of all of those around. And if you're, kind of trying to figure that out, don't worry, we all are. I don't think anybody is ever going to be a perfectionist or perfect within workplace etiquette, but that is something that I think you continue to grow and evolve into throughout your career. So definitely looking forward to sharing more about the kind of specific things I've seen throughout my time in the workforce when it comes to workplace etiquette with everybody on the call.
Okay, how about we go to you next, Margie?
Okay, great. Happy you're all here. I am Margie Stewart, and as Shelley mentioned, I've worked in the Career Center for about 18 years, and so I have a lot of experience guiding students and alumni in their career and job search so they can be successful. And part of that process means that job seekers need to be polished and need to feel confident in presenting themselves, whether it's from interviewing in their resume and networking situations in person or virtually. And so even though employers may not be hosting in-person interviews and including the meals at this time, it's still important to learn because we know that things will change in the future. And I think that even though proper dining etiquette may not be the primary skill in getting a job, being cognizant of your social manners and using proper etiquette in an interview or in any interactions leading towards a job offer is noticeable, and subconsciously we do judge or make decisions based on that. So I feel really passionate about this topic because I do want candidates to be successful in their career.
And go ahead, Brad, I'm sorry.
Well, thank you, Shelley. The only thing I would add, I totally agree with Margie and Brett's comments. I would just add from my perspective, the position I'm in now and really most of the things I've done throughout my career have focused on relationship building. And when we think about relationship building, it just puts such an emphasis on interpersonal communication and understanding the other person or group you're dealing with. And many times that puts you in a setting of some level of formality, whether it's in a business meeting or a dinner, a meal situation. And as Brett mentioned, it's not something we just all of a sudden arrive at and we have this knowledge. It's something we gain along the way and observe and adapt. And that's what I will share when I get a chance later, is to share a little bit of an international perspective on these topics. So I appreciate the chance to be here, and we'll turn it back over to Shelley.
Great. So now that we've learned some of our panelists' initial thoughts on the topic, let's go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint. And Brett, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Yeah, so if we can go to the next slide here. So what I wanted to talk with you all today, and I think why I was asked to present, is a little bit more around my experience within working in corporate America. As I mentioned, my first 2 years out of college were with Missouri State in the staffing capacity, and then I made the switch and went into the corporate side of things about 8 years ago. So I've been very fortunate to spend my time with Cerner, and through that kind of seen a lot, and you see a lot from the recruiting side as well as when you start your career. What does it look like to get integrated here? So there's just a lot of different things that kind of come into play, but I think the biggest part that matters is the impression that you leave. So when you're looking for a job, when you're entering the job market, it is going to be competitive, and you're going to want to try to find those ways to stand out. And if you're in a time when, COVID is no longer the predominant factor keeping us all home, if business dinners are a thing again, or interviewing dinners are a thing again, having appropriate etiquette in that setting is going to be monumental. You don't want to be that person at the table that's standing out for all the wrong reasons. So you want to make sure that you have an idea of what you're getting yourself into and just kind of those basic norms that you're going into. Once you've secured a job, so make sure you get past the interviewing process and all the etiquette involved there. Once you got there, workplace etiquette is also going to be a big thing. I had to do a little bit of research on just workplace etiquette. I think once you get into the workforce, for some of us, is just kind of you learn it and you never put actual language or words to it. But I found the basic definition here was work etiquette is a code that governs the expectations of social behavior in a workplace. So making sure that you're paying attention to what are the norms of how people interact with each other once you're on the job, and getting comfortable operating within that space, but then also feeling that challenge to grow and expand as well. And then hopefully throughout, the conversation here, you're able to pick up on all the things that might be for yourself, just really strong things that you can work on, areas that you can improve or develop your skill sets on and continue to grow. So jumping in here a little bit more from the work etiquette specific piece. So Margie's going to share a lot when it comes to the dining etiquette side, and Brad's going to share a lot from the international space. So for me, what has it been like in corporate America for the last 8 years in terms of just workplace etiquette, and where have I failed and where have I seen other people kind of not pick it up until they get later on? And the biggest one that I still find to be a challenge today is communication is everything. Communication, how you talk with your peers, how you talk to subordinates, and how you talk to superiors, and the amount of communication you're doing is crucial to your success. So if you're not communicating well, that's going to be a problem. If you're not over communicating, if you're not giving that level of transparency when you're going into a meeting, when you're talking to your bosses, your managers, you're really kind of setting yourself up for failure, and nobody wants to fail, obviously. So if you're ever at a point where you feel like things aren't just coming across, your message isn't being heard, you feel like you're struggling, there's probably a communication barrier that needs to be addressed. And it most likely, I would say, kind of start with yourself. A lot of these things is you can start with yourself. So start to figure out, can I communicate more, and can I communicate better? Can I share my message in a way that that resonates with my audience in that case? So for me, that came down to, I didn't typically share all the things I was working on. I didn't typically share all my expectations for my career growth. I didn't always share, all the things that, all my roadblocks that were coming up. And what I found was my boss can't read my mind. And so I would typically struggle from that standpoint. And I would hit these major walls of frustration. So when possible, communicate, share what's going on, be respectful with what's going on, making sure you're identifying all the right and wrong things that are happening, and you're able to label them appropriately, and you're not just, complaining for the sake of complaining, but make sure that you're definitely talking about all these things. And to this point, I say over communicate. I have learned, if I need to share details with somebody, and especially in a virtual setting, since many of us are working from home now, over communicating is key. Set up a call, set up an email, get together with somebody and make sure you're sharing those messages often so everybody's on the same page. One of the other things about workplace etiquette is respect others' space. So when I worked at Missouri State, I worked in admissions. So Kristen Roop, I know, is on the call. Hi, Kristen. But I had my own office, and I absolutely loved it because I had my own space that I could be a recluse and go into. And when I needed to focus or get work done, I could shut the door. Or if I needed to turn music on and not respect or not bother other people, I could do that. However, when we made the move to corporate America, my setting changed. I worked in a open seating kind of floor, and people are not always great about respecting boundaries in those instances. So I had to learn, again, to communicate. I had to learn how to share with people, hey, if I have my headphones in, like, please leave me be. I'm like in my flow state. I'm like trying to knock some things out here. And I had to share what that meant for me. And from the other side, it meant the exact same thing. I had to be respectful of other people. If I noticed people were doing things, I essentially needed to model the behavior that I wanted people to do for me. So that was one of those things. And in certain workplaces that you go into, you might find that they have specific cultural rules around minding the space of others. What does it mean when you can distract or engage with other people versus when you shouldn't? And so again, be very mindful of that. In a virtual setting, what this really kind of boils down to is being respectful of other people's times. Just because we're not traveling, just because everything can be done on a Teams or a Zooms meeting, doesn't mean that you should be booking up your colleagues and your peers' calendars like crazy. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't just be ringing up people, on the fly. You still want to be respectful of those people's times, because that's where they're trying to get work done as well. And so finding those ways and setting those cultural norms within your teams and your organizations is really going to be crucial. This is the show up and be present is going to flow in person as well as on the virtual side. If you are coming to a meeting and you are on your phone, and if I know we have a lot of alumni on the call and a few students. I was a teaching assistant when I was in grad school at Missouri State, and it cracked me up because I really understood what professors dealt with when they would see a student looking down at not the desk, but looking down in between things. It is really easy to tell when somebody is texting or on their phone when they're on a call or when they're doing things. And so when you're not present, people feel disrespected. I'm not willing to do as much as I can because I know that you're not trying to be fully present. So why should I? And so when you're doing this in the workplace, that is a thing that is really evident here. People want your attention. And if you schedule time with someone and you're not being fully present, you're essentially kind of disrespecting that person's time, and you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're being really mindful in that case. And so
I'm not sure what happened to Brett, but I will go ahead and take over. I know that he was wrapping up on some virtual etiquette. So if he comes back on and he has more to add, we can go ahead and do that. But why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide on proper dining etiquette. And I can go ahead and start there. Go ahead to the next one. Yes. So I wish that we could all be having an etiquette dinner in person. It would be a lot more fun than doing it virtually, but we can make the best of this. What many interviews may include is if it's an interview that may last longer than a few hours, sometimes an employer will include a meal in part of that interview process. And maybe it's one-on-one, or maybe it's a group of people. And so I think it's really good to be aware of who's going to be at that interview and who's going to be at the lunch, and to be mindful that it's not necessarily a break, even though it may not be interview questions, but it still is an interview. So you need to kind of still behave as part of the interview. To kind of get started, I like to define etiquette. It is defined as like a code of behavior in society, protocols, manners, traditional rules, and sometimes they may come across rather formal. And there are some very formal rules when it comes to dining etiquette, but it is derived from the French word etiquette, which means ticket. And ticket is a new job promotion. It may lead to a job or a new promotion or to that next opportunity that you want. So we could go ahead and move to the next slide. Reasons why dining etiquette is important is that it helps demonstrate social skills, manners, and confidence in social environments. So that as an employer, if you're thinking of like in an interview type setting, an employer is getting a good sense of how you may be maybe on the job. Say, depending on your career path, proper dining etiquette can be really beneficial in some work settings, such as closing sales or negotiating a contract or enlisting new clients. So they may really like to kind of see how you behave, especially if you're going to be in a lot of business meetings and interacting with people in that kind of a setting. The main thing that's really important about knowing dining etiquette is that it's really focused more on building rapport and being attentive than the meal. So just kind of keep that in mind. We just don't want the lack of you not knowing your dining etiquette to get in the way of what would otherwise be a really successful interview or meeting. So we could go ahead and go to the next slide. I thought this one was just kind of fun as far as here we are during this COVID time and not able to really handshake. And I saw the slide with other handshake alternatives. I think not all of them are appropriate for maybe an interview or for some important meetings that you may have. I do think that clasping your hands at your chest, smiling, nodding, and saying hello is a professional alternative to handshake. I think depending on who's there, you need to make sure that you're greeting everybody who's there, just like you would if you were going to shake their hands. So it's important you kind of continue that type of a greeting. Introduce yourself to others if they have not certainly come and introduce themselves to you. Some simple rule when it comes to dining etiquette is you want to think of whoever invited you to this meal, to this dinner or lunch. They are the host. So they are the leader. So you want to follow their lead. just mirroring what they do. So if they are very formal in the way they order and eat and in their conversation, you would follow suit. For example, you might have to wait till the host sits before you take a seat, unless they indicate to go ahead and have a seat. Or you may wait for them to open up the menu before you open up the menu. So just kind of following their lead to kind of help you identify what you should be doing. As far as ordering food, you don't want to order the most expensive meal on the menu. Asking them for suggestions or recommendations would be really good, so you know kind of what that price range might be. You also want to think about what kind of food you order that's going to be easy to eat while you're talking with people. Things I could think of, things that are more good to avoid than to eat, but avoiding pasta, barbecue, broccoli, or any kind of greens that might get into your teeth, foods that are messy, traditional chicken, fish, salad, those are probably safe. If it's a sandwich that's easy to hold your fingers, but you kind of want to avoid finger food too, just because that might look a little too casual. So my guess is like something that's going to be simple to eat, that's not messy. So anything that's not too saucy. Other things to think about are if they ask if you'd like to order a drink. During an interview, no alcohol. That is, I clearly recommend no, not ordering any kind of alcoholic beverage, even if the employer indicates that's okay. During an interview, I don't think that's the best thing to do. If it's a business meeting or something, some other kind of a gathering, I think it is okay to order maybe one drink, but limit it to just one, maybe a glass of wine or a beer, keeping it that's not the focus. So I know that there was questions about that, about how do you, if somebody asks like, what would you like to drink? If you are unsure and you're in a business environment, ordering water first is always a good safe bet. But if you're in an interview, avoid alcohol. Conversations that are great to start with is, or to kind of keep on track, would be things along the lines of small talk about the restaurant itself, or if it's at somebody's home, commenting on the atmosphere. I do see that we have some slideshow issues here, so I'm hoping that will get resolved. But the things to kind of talk about might be even hobbies or professional interests that you may have, so that you can share things that you might do on the side, such as if you're volunteering. But you want to avoid the topics of politics and religion. So we could go now to the slide of the formal place setting, if we can get that up and running again. But a formal place setting is really important to get familiar with. What we haven't mentioned is that we do have a brochure that we will be sending everybody after this presentation. It's called Don't Slurp Your Soup, and it does have a lot of great tools and information. The formal place setting can be kind of overwhelming and complicated if you're not familiar with it. So you want to think of a few things, and I'll try to provide this visual. The forks are always placed on the left-hand side of the place setting, and the knives and the spoon are always placed on the right-hand side. And so, yeah, here we go. So you'll see that there's a specific, this is a setting that is applied for most dinner settings. You may ask why there are multiple silverware. Multiple silver or utensils are intended to provide different utensils for each course. So say, for example, you may get a salad first. You would always eat with the utensil on the outer edges and move in as you move through your courses. So your salad fork and your spoon, soup spoon, are always on the end, and you'll move through them so that you'll have a spoon for the next course. A helpful tool in remembering which plate and where the drinks go. Your bread plate will always be above your fork, and so it's on the left-hand side. Your drinks are always on the right-hand side above your knife and spoon. So there's this little trick. It's called the B and D trick. You put the tips of your finger to your thumb and the index, and extend your index fingers. You'll see that it looks like B and D. So you can think of B for the bread and D for drinks. So it helps you kind of remember what placement at your table place setting is your bread plate and which is your drink plate. Some tips on eating bread. As you'll see, the bread plate and the bread knife are there. You will eat your bread kind of one bite at a time, meaning that instead of spreading butter all over your entire roll, you will place a serving of butter on your bread plate and break off a bite-sized piece of bread, butter it, then eat one bite at a time instead of spreading it all over and eating the roll as a whole. It just has a little bit more of a graceful appearance. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is during the meal, you may very much want to dip your bread in your soup or wipe up some sauce on your plate with your bread. And that's really not an appropriate thing to do, especially in a formal setting. So try to avoid doing that. I know that's a hard one for me. We will go ahead and go to the next slide. The next slide is more of a casual setting. I'm probably more familiar with this type setting. However, etiquette still applies, and you think about your napkin. Your napkin is sometimes it's on your plate. When you get there, you'll want to put your napkin on your lap first thing. And you don't want to jerk it or shake it and put on your, you want to kind of just quietly put it on your lap. If you have a very large napkin, you could fold it in half and have the crease facing you. So if food spills, it kind of falls to the floor rather than on you. If the utensils are wrapped up in your napkin, the fork goes on the left and the knife and the spoon go on the right-hand side. Throughout your meal, the napkin is really used to more like blot or dab, not necessarily to wipe your face. So you kind of want to be a little more graceful with your napkin. Little tricks, like if you need to leave the table, say you need to go to the restroom during the meal, you place the napkin on the seat. And if you're actually through with your meal and you're about ready to leave, you would put your napkin next to your plate on the table. You wouldn't put it on your plate, but just next to your plate. Food service, when you're in a restaurant, the wait staff serve their food from the left, and they will clear your plate from the right. So it's just kind of good to be aware of that so you're not in their way. When it comes to passing food, if you're sitting at a table with, say, 4 or 5 people, you will always pass your food to the right. Now, if you're the closest one to, say, bread basket or the salad dressing, you would offer it to the person on your left, serve yourself, and then pass it on to the right. It's really important to kind of keep in mind that even if something is kind of in reach, but somebody else is closer to, say, the salt and pepper, you should always ask them to pass the salt and pepper so that they'll go around the room, around the table. Salt and pepper should also be served together as a set, not just one of them. So if somebody says, could you pass the salt? You just automatically will pass the pepper with the salt shaker too. When cutting your food, you cut one piece at a time. You wouldn't cut up all your meat or all your vegetables like you might for a child. So just one at a time. And you want to think about your posture. You want to sit upright. You don't want to slouch. Bring your food up to you. And it's okay to rest your hands on your lap or maybe your forearms on the table, but you definitely want to avoid putting your elbows on the table. It looks relaxed, and we've all heard for years, don't put your elbows on the table. We will go ahead and move to the next slide. So there are some two eating styles that are most common in the United States. You'll see that there's the American style and the continental style. American and continental style starts with the fork in the left hand and the knife in the right hand. When you're cutting food, you would always use your pointer finger on your fork and knife, kind of like this, rather than your hands, like what a child would do. So you want to make sure you're always using your pointer finger. You also want to think about the differences between the American style and continental. Some of you have grown up one way or the other. They're both common in the United States. The American style has another term for kind of zigzag. That is when you use your right hand for your knife. In both situations, you have your knife in the right hand and your fork in your left. But eating, the American style will put their knife down and switch hands. So their right hand will now have the fork and they will eat with their fork. Continental style, they will cut with their right hand with the knife, but they will keep the fork in their left hand and eat with the tines down. And so it kind of has a different method. One thing nice about the continental style is it's less awkward, or you're not moving around so much. So it's kind of easier to look polite, I guess. I've always thought it looked far more polished than the American style, but it's oftentimes is what you're used to. So we will go ahead and move on to the next slide, which soup. The bowl of soup, we oftentimes will get some soup that may come with the meal. This topic has always been kind of different to me because I learned that when you're supposed to insert the spoon into your soup, but then instead of drawing it towards you, which is my natural inclination, you're actually supposed to draw it away from you. If you're sitting upright and leaning over the bowl, it should work pretty well. You would just fill your soup spoon about 3/4 full, and you would just sip from the side of the spoon. You don't put the entire spoon in your mouth. You definitely do not want to drink from the soup bowl like you might at home. If you are done with your soup and your soup spoon, you can put your spoon on the plate underneath the bowl. If there's not one provided, it is okay to leave the spoon in the bowl. Whatever you do, you could put it on your plate, your dinner plate as well, but whatever you do not put it on the table. We will go ahead and move to the next slide. Some of you may not have known this. I really don't use this, so I have known about it for a while. There is a resting and a finished position that you can put your utensils. So if you are not eating, but you're not done either, maybe you're just resting for a minute, talking, you can place your utensils in the resting position. So your fork with the tines down are at the 8 o'clock position, and your knife with the blades in are at the 4 o'clock position. And then if you're done and you're trying to signal to the wait staff that they can take your plate, you can place your fork and knife at the 4 o'clock position, the tines down and the blades of the knife in. And we can go to the next slide. The coffee cup, I wanted to share with you, if in the place setting, the coffee cup is, if the coffee cup is already served at the table, if you do not want coffee, you would turn it upside down, and that just signals to the wait staff that you don't want coffee. But if you turn it upright, that lets them know that you do want coffee. So that's just something to know in case if you've ever wondered. But other things to consider is that how you treat the wait staff is also a representation of you. So be courteous, be thankful, appreciate, say please, say thank you to your wait staff as well, to show your appreciation. And we will go ahead to the next slide. Your bill, you may wonder, are you supposed to pay for your portion if it's in an interview, or if somebody has invited you for a business dinner? As a general rule, the host or the interviewer will pay for that meal. So you do not need to offer to pay or to fight over the check. Just know that that's generally paid for by the host. You don't need to worry about the tip or anything along those lines either. One recommendation, don't ask for a box or a doggy bag for any leftover foods in these types of situations, unless the host insists on it. For example, you may have a beautiful meal that you really didn't get a chance to touch. They may say, oh, you definitely should take that home. If they say something like that, that's certainly okay, but I wouldn't be asking for it for yourself. So those are some main tips. I know I've kind of gone through this pretty quickly, but you will get a brochure on more information. As you finish up your meal, being gracious and thanking the interviewer for the meal. Make sure that you leave your napkin on the table right next to your plate. And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Brad so he can talk about some of the international and cross-cultural considerations.
Thanks, Margie. My goal today is to do a couple of things. One is to, in some ways, maybe provide some exceptions to the rules that Margie just shared. And in doing so, it's mostly with the point of encouraging you to be aware of different perspectives and to be aware of different settings that might be beyond what we look at from an American standpoint. So when we're working in intercultural development, we use the image of the iceberg a lot because culture is a lot like an iceberg. There are things above the water surface that are very tangible and easy to recognize. And there's a lot of things below the water surface that we don't see, but that have a very big impact. And so when we think about the goals in an intercultural meeting, business setting, meal, the goal is the same thing that Margie and Brett have already described. Our goal is to be a generous host if we're a host, or to be a gracious guest if we're a guest. But sometimes these unseen cultural obstacles that are the below the water line part of the iceberg get in the way. So Lori, if you go to the next slide, I think we have a video that, if it works, gives us an example. So we're going to show this video if it's possible.
The English believe it's a slur on your host's food if you don't clear your plate. Whereas the Chinese feel you're questioning their generosity if you do. At HSBC, we never underestimate the importance of local knowledge, which is why we have local banks staffed by local people in over 80 countries across the globe. HSBC, the world's local bank.
Okay, well, we'll move on. So thanks for trying that. What you were able to do is hear a very funny video, but it's not very funny if you can't see it. So I won't spend a lot of time describing it because we're in a limited time frame here. But the context of that situation is one that we confront a lot in international experiences. And it's basically when one side of the culture or one side of the meeting, the host, is operating under a particular cultural set of rules and norms and manners, and the guest is operating under his or her own norms and rules and manners. And so basically the thrust of the video was that in China, one of the cultural rules is you leave a little bit of food on your plate to signify that you're satisfied, that you've had enough and you're happy with the meal. And if you fully clean your plate, then the host is obligated to bring more food. And so the uproar that was going on in that video was more and more food coming to the English guest who was following, the way he was taught, which is you clean your plate. That's how you show you're a good guest. And so it's a simple thing. It's kind of a funny thing if you have a chance to go look at the video later. But the point is, it's a real situation, and it's a real situation we can encounter a lot if we go into a setting following our own rules, our own perspective, and do not have an awareness of how another culture operates. So when cultural researchers kind of organize their thinking and put the categories out there for comparison of national cultures, these are 4 of the categories that are used, and they all have an impact on these kind of dining and etiquette situations we're talking about. The important thing, and I'll hit on each of these very briefly, but the important thing for us to recognize as Americans, those of us on this in this meeting who are Americans, is that we are in the minority worldwide. About 25% of the world is an individual culture, and about 75% lives in a collective culture. Direct versus indirect communication, again, about 1/4 of the world speaks very directly and candidly and straightforward as we do, and indirect communication is the mode in 3/4 of the world. So if we go to the next slide, I'll try to share some brief examples of how this relates to our topic today. So everything that Margie shared was about dining in an individual setting, and that's certainly appropriate, well, right now with COVID, of course, and also generally from an American cultural perspective. But you go to many, many parts of the world where the social orientation is toward the group, the dining is family style. So in Asia, I've had many experiences in China where the meal is as that photo is on the left, with shared plates and an enormous amount of food and tremendous hospitality, but it's shared food using chopsticks instead of a knife and fork. And there are parts of the world where you eat with your hand, and you eat with your right hand in particular. So you have to really observe what the host is doing and do some homework and prepare before you get into that type of cultural situation, because the rules we've learned here don't apply in these particular settings. Just a couple of tips, I guess, to think about. One is when you have a variety of dishes like that in front of you, I think it's good to try everything, but you don't have to, there's no way you're going to eat everything. There's always a lot of food that's left, and you will find some things you like more than others, and you'll certainly encounter food that is unfamiliar, and you might sit back a little bit and be concerned about trying it. So that's a situation to be prepared for, and just make the effort to try new things is what I would encourage you to do. Also, we've talked a lot about not slurping soup. Well, if you go to Japan or China, where noodles and soup are served, slurping is absolutely fine. In fact, slurping in some cases is seen as a sign of appreciation for how good the meal is. So while we're trying to be very careful and scoop our spoon away from us and take a nice polite bite of soup, in China, they'll bring the soup right up the soup bowl to the mouth and slurp it. And so I'm not saying you need to do that in China, but you don't need to be afraid to do that in China. And most importantly, you need to be careful not to be offended by hosts who would do that, because that is the norm. That is the etiquette in China. We can go on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, we have different styles of communication, and going back to Brett's comment earlier, communication is everything. And it is everything, but it is also expressed in very different ways. So we are living in a very direct communication culture here, and that more circuitous route that's called high context culture is what you see in the red block. Just some things to generally be aware of. If you're in a communication setting that's indirect and you're having a business meal, you're generally not going to discuss business details during the meal. There'll be very limited reference to the specific business. It will be much more about building the relationship, getting to know your host, sharing information about family and interests and things that you might at first feel impatient, not getting to the point of talking about business, but you have to have patience to realize that's all part of building the relationship. You want to be aware of many things that have hidden rules that we're not even aware of in terms of greetings and particular ways to exchange business cards. Proxemics is the term for it in intercultural communications, but that basically means how much personal space do you have and how close are you to the other person. Touch, in some cultures, it's high touch, where you'll greet someone with a hug or even a kiss. In others, it's very formal. And in the pre-COVID days, it would be a handshake. Again, it may be a new form of greeting now from the current standpoint. But there's symbolism, and those gestures generally have a deeper meaning. So again, I would encourage you to be aware first that there are differences and do homework before you would find yourself in that situation. Okay, Lori, we can go on to the next one as well. So again, along the same lines, there are differences in what we call power distance, which is basically the attitude people in a country have toward hierarchy and toward unequal distribution of power. Are we comfortable that there's a big boss and that big boss is very important? Or are we more in the US where we tend to prefer the equality and call each other by first names and have a little more relaxed culture? Well, we generally do that here, although it's different according to different situations and types of business and profession. But abroad, you're usually in situations where there is a high power distance, which means the host is very important. And just as Margie said earlier, in terms of mirroring the host and responding to what the host does, you especially want to do that in these settings because the seat placement where the host is seated and the guest of honor has a certain seat next to the host. There are formalities related to toasts and to gift exchange and to when you depart the meeting. Oftentimes when the meal is over, you don't linger. You need to depart promptly because the host won't leave until the guest has left. And so there are a lot of, again, hidden rules that relate to power distance. And finally, I'll just make a point about time. Time is maybe the thing that Americans are most known for around the world, of being very obsessed with time, being precisely on time, worried about the length of a meeting, worried about the agenda and getting those things accomplished. And you go to, again, most parts of the world, time is perceived very differently. So in some countries, they will start a meeting or a meal precisely on time. Someplace like Sweden or Germany, places in Europe. But you can go to other places in Mexico, Brazil, South America, and it would be literally impossible for a meeting to start at the appointed hour. And if you showed up at precisely the right time, expecting it to start, you would be the only one there. And there would be, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour and a half, I mean, it could be very different than what we're used to in terms of the start time and the length of meetings because of the relationship building aspect of it. You go to China, Japan, places in Asia, the meals would generally start on time and they would be fairly predictable in terms of the length of time, but it's different in various countries. So that's why I would recommend doing your homework. And that's where we'll go with the last slide, which is just a couple of tips to end on. We've talked about a lot of these already. Observe and adapt to your situation. Be aware. Frankly, that's the starting point. Be aware that there are other rules and other forms of etiquette in various places. So do your homework. There are sites online you can research. One I like to use is called eDiplomat, which has very detailed overview of the business etiquette for various countries. Not everyone would follow that to a T in each country, but it gives you a good general guideline of how to prepare for being culturally competent and operating effectively, and not embarrassing yourself too much when you get into other cultures. So that's where the self-awareness comes in, particularly of your nonverbal communication. Just be aware of gestures and that they have other meanings in other countries. Be aware of how you interact with other people, because sometimes your words may not be understood if you're speaking through an interpreter, but your gestures will, and your eye contact will. And again, things like that are perceived differently in various countries. So I would say respect is probably a good term to close it on. That's really the most important thing we're trying to share as a host and as a guest. I'm going to kick it back over to Brett because he's back on and had a little bit more to share in terms of virtual etiquette, and then hopefully we'll leave at least a few minutes to address questions.
Thanks, Brad. My apologies, everyone. This actually kind of works out nicely because virtual etiquette, you never know when your internet's going to decide to kick you off and you have to rejoin a webinar call in the middle of a presentation. So all these things kind of worked out just kind of nicely in that regard. So going back through what I was talking about with etiquette in the workplace and work in general, things that you might want to do, virtual meetings and virtual etiquette, I think, in my humble opinion, is going to be the way of the world, even once we move back into people being in an office setting. I think hybrid workforce is going to be a big thing. And so having defined what you consider to be appropriate workplace and virtual etiquette in settings is going to be really crucial. I think all of the presentations hit on the biggest point about all of this is being aware of your audience, being aware of the cultural norms and the etiquette norms in your place of business and the groups and people that you're talking to. And then even within your teams, you're going to find that your team etiquette in your place of business might slightly differ than the entire workforce or the entire business's etiquette. And so being aware and keeping all of those things in mind is going to be really crucial. With that being said, there's always kind of standard best practices that you should be operating against. So one, I did test my setup. I promise we have multiple meetings to make this work, and yet I still ran into issues. But if you can, always test your setup. I say, we're a Microsoft Teams company here at Cerner. I say, but we're doing Zoom today, and you never know when something is just going to throw a glitch in the system. So when possible, test your setup. Make sure if you're going to be doing video calls that you check your background. So you see that all of us make sure we have fairly clean and decent backgrounds here. I try to make sure mine looks really pretty with rainbow books. So make sure you have some visually, potentially something appealing behind you, but make sure that you do test yourself. When you're on a call, and you saw that we also demonstrated this today, so this is kind of perfect. We all muted ourselves when we weren't presenting. And that is something that is going to be really crucial when you're doing these meetings. You could probably go out and find 1,000,001 different BuzzFeed, YouTube, whatever kind of random videos of people who don't mute themselves during a call and the shenanigans it gets them into because of it. We've even seen that people have lost their jobs because they didn't mute themselves and they have said things that they didn't realize were being on the call. So be mindful, again, be present, but when you're on a call, just best practices is if you're not talking, mute yourself. And that way you're always kind of protecting yourself in that case. One of the other pieces here, don't multitask. I am sometimes bad at this, but if you're on a call and you need to be actively present, don't try to respond to emails. Don't respond. We call them pings or instant messages. Don't be trying to do all of those things in the middle of a call. Again, it's very just disrespectful and you're not being fully present, and people will be 100% aware of that. And so you want to make sure that you are being there. The other one that I'm going to continue to harp on across the board is just be present. Follow the cultural norms of your teams. So if your teams don't do video calls, there's a lot of companies that I partner with outside of Cerner, and they don't do video calls. So I'm sometimes the only person with it on, and then I have to go and turn mine off because I understand that's not the norm. So again, be aware. If your team likes to have cameras on, turn them on. If your team doesn't, then turn them off. If you're not sure what the norms are, ask someone. The biggest thing you can do is just ask what that is and ask for it to be defined. I mean, there's a lot of articles, especially from HBR, that talk about if your team hasn't talked about maybe if you need to step away for a bathroom break, maybe you're taking care of children at home, maybe the mailman comes, maybe somebody's working on your home. don't leave your camera on and mute yourself and then yell off at somebody on the screen. Turn your camera off, go take care of whatever you need to, send a message saying, hey, I need to step away, and be respectful of what's going on in the meeting. So those are going to be the big ones. I want to leave some time. I think we got like 4 minutes here, so sorry, Shelly. Leave some time for questions, but I think that's where we are now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we will slip a few questions in. Again, just as a reminder, you will have access to emails for all of these presenters, so you can follow up with them after, because I know we won't get to very many of these questions today, unfortunately. So we did have a question that came in from the audience, so I'll throw this out to see who is interested in answering this one. In normal non-COVID time, how do you handle when leaders frown upon personnel who do not socialize beyond an event time, beyond an event in time? So for example, if the event ends at 9 and they want you to join at the bar, but you really prefer to retire for the night. I've seen personnel labeled not team players if they don't stay and socialize at the bar. Does anybody have any advice for this individual?
I will chime in here. I say it's an interesting one, because it's a double-edged sword. You don't want to come off as a non-team player, but you also want to have a respectful boundary between work and your personal life and what you need to do for yourself. So I think, one, anytime that you can go in and make those kind of conversations known prior to an event. So just setting the kind of boundaries for yourself prior to it. Hey, I have to be home by 9, whatever your personal reasons might be. Or if you don't feel like you have to share that, hey, just let people know, I have a kind of a timeline. I need to be home by this specific time. Please be respectful of that. Definitely encourage you guys to have fun and find other ways that you can indulge in those cases. No one should feel peer pressured into doing things. And if your team does make you feel peer pressure to go and do something outside of your comfort zone, I think that brings up a bigger conversation that needs to be had between you and your team and your subordinate around what are those etiquette and those cultural rules that need to be there. But I think in the first and foremost, it always is back to, what do you feel that you have the comfortability to turn the invitation down and not feel like you're going to get in trouble for it? And if not, then we need to have a separate conversation. That would be my take.
Okay. And I think we have another question that's kind of somewhat similar to that. And I think, Brad, let's throw this one towards you. This individual wrote, often at client dinners or happy hours, alcohol might be encouraged. And if you're a person who doesn't consume alcohol, what's a polite and professional way to decline alcohol without killing the mood with your clients?
I don't know why you give me the alcohol question, Shelley. It does relate to a lot of our experience in international settings, because in many cultural settings internationally, alcohol is part of the meal at dinner, and it's frankly part of the business relationship process in China and other countries in particular. So it's a good question. The way I've seen it handled, and have handled it myself in some cases, is you have to, at least in that setting in China, you have to basically not start drinking. If you start drinking, then you're going to be getting toasts all night and drink probably more than you want to. So people that don't drink for either health reasons or they just personally don't do it, it's fine to just say, I don't drink, and drink something else, and just give that answer from the start. What I found difficult in the international settings is to start drinking, but then try to stop when you're ready to stop, and not, respond to the peer pressure of the host when you're trying to be a good guest and they're trying to get you drunk, I think. So that's a challenging setting. Now, domestically, I think, again, it's fairly straightforward. And again, it's about respect and communication, as Brett has mentioned before. So just say, I don't drink, and be straightforward with that. I don't think you should put yourself in a situation to do something you're not comfortable with in a meal setting.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And so sorry again that we're not going to be able to get to many of the questions. I did want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today and are walking away just a little bit more confident when it comes to business and dining etiquette. If you have suggestions on topics or alumni speakers, please include them on the survey that you will be receiving later today. Again, we will be including the contact information for our panelists so you can follow up with them on some of your questions. And our next Bear Talks webinar will be Thursday, January 14th from noon to 1 p.m. Central Time. And the topic will be Home Buying 101. So we hope that you will be joining us for that. And again, appreciate you all being here.